apropos today, on April 3rd, 92, in the Press Democrat. You may have read this article. Youth escaped pit where Iraqis slaughtered Kurds. This was an exact replay of the Einsatzgruppen operation. What's a 12-year-old kid, I don't care what his race, creed, or religion is, being forced into a pit and shot in a mass murder on the border of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. So if you do go to New York, you will be right at United Nations Plaza, and it would be an interesting bit of investigation for you to report on back to us. Okay, thank you.
Another announcement that Ilka Hartmann asked me to make. She is the person primarily responsible, by the way, for the White Rose exhibition currently in the Commons. And that is this. In Berkeley, in Oakland, on Saturday, May 2nd, is taking place a production called Acts of Reconciliation, a Holocaust commemoration. Jews and Germans remembering their shared legacy through theater, music, poetry, and ritual. It's extensively here, and I won't read the whole thing to you, but I'll pass these leaflets out and you can circulate them.
Also, in relation to the White Rose exhibit, I hope all of you can get over there between 9 and 5 in the Commons. It's a real important and well-done exhibit. I have a handout here that's the manifesto of the White Rose Student Resistance Group. It's the only documented student resistance group that we have under the Third Reich, and it's a real interesting statement that they made and leafleted in their cities. 50, so if you can maybe take every other, that would help. We just can't copy everything. And then I have, for $2, I have that gray book, which is very well done, on the White Rose Student Collective. And I have quite a few of them, so probably most people could buy one for $2. We're just asking for that amount to pay back some of the costs. Also, for those of you who are interested, on KQED, on April 22nd, Wednesday, 9 o'clock, an excellent documentary on the Lodz ghetto, which was the second largest ghetto, a concentration of Jews in Nazi-controlled Europe during World War II. It's an excellent film, and according to Dr. Steiner, it's a very accurate film also in terms of the Lodz ghetto. So those of you watch for that at KQED, 9 o'clock on April 22nd. One more event that I'm going to announce, I'll be announcing again after vacation, but we want to go ahead and start the publicity. Bernard Offen, who will be on the panel today, will be presenting his personally made documentary videotape on May 5th in Stevenson 2075. It's entitled The Work, and it's an important application of Holocaust, a personal Holocaust story to current times, and he brings it into the nuclear age, the meaning of what he went through as a child survivor of Auschwitz. It's an excellent videotape. I encourage you to come. We'll remind you again so you don't, when we come back from vacation, because I know it's hard to remember things over vacation. And we also have a handout. In terms of the attendance sheet, some people are complaining they don't get a chance to sign it. We try to send it all through the audience completely, but what we can do is at the end leave it at the table. So if you miss signing it, sign on the back table. We'll try to have it back there. Also, underneath the attendance sheet, because I don't have time to go over all the details, the oral history, Holocaust Oral History Project of San Francisco regularly survivor stories from the Holocaust, and they have hundreds and hundreds of them, and they broadcast them sometimes on KQED, sometimes on local community TV. There's a schedule that covers Sonoma County that includes all of the April viewings, one a week, that will be underneath the attendance sheet. So when it comes by, you jot down the time and the survivor stories. There's 4 different stories that will be shown in April. So I will try to do that each month for the last 2 of the series, so that people who are interested in seeing the extra stories, it's a real valuable way to gather more information about the Holocaust. I think any other papers, what? Any papers that are still not, what, turned in? Any sociology papers still not turned in, please get them to us. Including education. There are several people who have an understanding with me about making up their papers. I said 2 weeks on, 2 weeks would be during Easter vacation, so I will take them the Tuesday after Easter vacation if you're working on a makeup paper. Okay? But those are people who've already made that understanding with me. Okay, one more thing. We have Lynn, can you say your name? Sikovac, who is a tutor in the tutorial center in the library. And she has offered to specially tutor students from this class, and she's taking the Holocaust class, and is also one of the special tutors there. You want to give us a word?
Hi. Scary. I wanted to let you know about the services at the tutorial program. As you know, our funding all across the university systems is pretty serious. This semester in the tutorial program, we are not getting enough people coming in and signing up for tutorial sessions. These services are paid for in your tuition, and they're partly funded through associated students as well. And what we're afraid of is that we may not be able to maintain these services if we don't use them more. So part of what I'm here to do is to remind you that we're there, and we offer you tutoring in writing, math, sciences, just about any aspect of your academic careers that you might possibly need any kind of help. And we really encourage you to come in and get assistance if you have any need at all. Please use the program. I'm going to pass out some bookmarkers, and feel free to take one of the many you want. And on these bookmarkers, it tells you where the program is located and our hours. And we want you to come in and look over the schedule and sign up for tutoring sessions. Thanks a lot. Any questions? Questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 10th session of the Holocaust lectures. Today, in keeping with the excellence of our lecture series, we have a most interesting and outstanding panel. The members of our panel are two of our professors, Dr. John Steiner and Dr. Philip Baird. You heard, if you attended regularly, we introduced Dr. Steiner before and tell about some of his achievements and experiences. But I would like to add one thing that I left out last time, and that was that he's also the head of the Sonoma State University Holocaust Studies Center, and also that he was awarded by the Czech government a Distinguished Service Cross for service and valor. The other professor, Dr. Philip Baird, professor of German at Sonoma State University, received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD from Stanford University, all in German studies. I think I'd like to quote something that he said, which will describe exactly what kind of person he is. He said that his interest in the Holocaust and Holocaust studies is because the Holocaust provides us with unique understanding how we can listen to, empathize with, to support one another, to growth or gain, or conversely, exclude, denigrate, oppress each other in scapegoating process that leads ultimately to mutual assured destruction. Dr. Baird has traveled 3 times to Nicaragua, helping the people there and in general to study that genocide. The other 2 members of the panel are Bernard Offen, who is originally from Poland, and Mr. Paul Schwartzbart, who is originally from Belgium. They are both survivors. Not from Belgium. Oh, Vienna. I'm sorry. I was told from Belgium. Anyway, from Vienna. I see some Viennese in the group. Yes. Anyway, I will not go into their stories because they will tell their own stories, which will be much more interesting than my telling anything about it, especially if I make the mistake of saying it's from Belgium. Thank you very much. We will start.
many of you speak German? Quite a few. Right. You look at me and you can see Schlagobers, yeah? For those of you who do not speak German, that's whipping cream. I have it in my veins. So, it's about the only claim to fame Vienna has as far as I'm concerned. But that's a different story. Dr. Steiner asked me here and infuse a note of optimism in the proceedings. I beg your pardon. Go on. Must have been an echo. I have been speaking about the Holocaust seriously for about 4 years. And the point that I tried to make, a little higher, better? I don't really need it, you know. Really, with my diaphragm? Okay. I've been teaching for 36 and I've developed a diaphragm which my wife says won't quit. Especially when I call our sons through the house. I was born in Vienna in 1933. This month I shall be 59 in spite of the Germans. And for the past 4 years I've been talking to schools, universities, social groups, religious groups, anyone who will have me and listen to what I have to say. Simply because the point that I want to make, there are 2 points that I underscore. One, that every individual is of major importance, that everybody counts, and that in spite of what people say, you know, you hear it so often, well, what can I do? I'm just a person. If the people who saved my life had thought that way, someone else would be speaking to you right now. Each one of them knew that he or she was a person who could do something, and then he or she did it. And that is why I'm standing here. So this is important to perhaps younger people than yourselves who haven't found themselves as yet and need to be told that they really matter and really count. All do. And as I give you a few details about the story, you will see what I mean. The other point that I underscore very heavily is that almost every person who helped me was somehow attached to the teaching profession. And you can drink as you raise your hand. Teachers, and this is of course one of the reasons I became one, have an enormous influence on everyone whom they meet, and they are capable of helping, and many of them helped me. This morning I was at the installation of the new president of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and one of the things that they said, they told a story about someone who went back to see, a very famous person who went back to see a teacher after 30 years, and the teacher was about to retire, and he was a writer, poet, and as he met her again, he could not find any words other than, thank you for what you did for me. And as they hugged, she thanked him. That tells the whole story about teachers and the people whom they encounter and whom they touch. Now, do you want this in broad lines or do you want some details, Dr. Steiner? I was in the direction about the story. How much time do I have? 3 minutes? 10 minutes? 20 minutes. I'm going to get the gory details. When I reached the age of 5 in 1938, you know the infamous Steiner, the night of the broken glass. And this is, I suppose, when my parents decided that things were getting a little bit heavy. I had gotten some inclination of what was happening because somebody grown up with had all of a sudden decided I was no longer fit company. I'm talking about 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, I was 5, who were telling me now, you dirty little pig of a Jew, get off the sidewalk and walk in the gutter where you belong. At least they still wanted me to walk, which is interesting. Anyway, my parents, my mother and my father decided that they were going to emigrate to the United States, you know, the land of milk and honey. And in order to do so, they had to get to a neutral country to await the visa. And they picked Belgium. We made our way from Vienna to Cologne. And there we had to separate because guides, men who were paid to cross the borders illegally, took either men or women and children, but didn't mix. So and this was, of course, December. You always pick the snows, right? So my father took off, and my mother and I left with a group of women and children, and we were caught by the Belgian gendarmerie somewhere in no man's land, and we went to Cologne, where my mother somehow, the Jewish mother, somehow managed to find enough money to pay another guy. I thought she'd given him all she had, but she managed it again. We tried it once more. I had a terrific ear infection, and I remember the warm oil being poured into my ear. Can you imagine 54 years later you remember a detail like that? Apparently it works because I can hear fairly well. 20/20 hearing. Tell my students. Let me check theirs. Okay, fine. This time we, that's the night that I really stopped being a kid, essentially lost my innocence, because my mother picked up somebody else's little kid and carried him on her shoulders, and I had to walk. You know, I was about this tall, and I made my way through the snow on my own, and I became not a man, but I stopped being a child that night. And we evaded the gendarmerie, we evaded their dogs, and we across the border. The unwritten law in those days was that if you were not caught, you could stay. Shades of the Rio Grande. You know, only shades. The way that poor little country of Belgium, and that's probably why you thought of me as a Belgian, in order to pay for all these immigrants who were sneaking in at night, required the men to work in labor camps. The figure I have in my mind is, and so my father went to work somewhere in the labor camp while my mother and I established a household in Brussels. If you took an apartment, the details that you remember, as I said before, are psychologically fascinating. If you take an apartment in Belgium, at least when you used to, you had to immediately put up curtains. It was the law. You could get arrested for not putting up curtains because you were registered with the police. And I can still see my mother on a bare floor with an iron she had borrowed, ending some schmattes. You understand Yiddish? Rags, you know, that she could then hang on the window, and we had curtains. No work permits, and there were no social organizations to help. How you were supposed to survive is beyond me. What most of the women did, they went to work illegally, of course, as housekeepers, because that's not a very visible type of occupation, and men couldn't. So my mother found work with a well-to-do family. She kept their house until March. And what happened between my father and myself during those couple of years was that we got to know each other very, very well. You know, fathers are usually away at work, or used to be, and so you saw them in the evening. I spent all my time with my father. We went for walks, we went to the park, we did a great deal of talking. And neither one knew, of course, that this was it for the rest of our lives, that we would not spend any more time together ever. On May 10th, 1950, was Friday. There were some parachutists in the sky. There was a lot of excitement. People were running around. I didn't really know what was happening. I was 7 years old. I had started school by then and had learned French. And so there came a knock at the door, and here was the Belgian police. They were quite striking. They had white helmets and black capes, which had lead in the seams so that they could twirl us in case of riot. Powerful weapons. And also some civilian police papers, and they asked for Friedrich Schwartzbart, who was my father, and they explained that because of the war situation, he being of Austrian origin, had to be arrested. And please come with us. As I've said many times, there was no unfriendliness involved. It was very matter of, you are Friedrich Schwartzbart, we are the police, you're under arrest. One can't help but think about what we Americans did to Japanese Americans. Very different, because we were doing it to our own people here in this country. Whereas these Belgians, they didn't really owe us anything, and we were potential dangers to them. They didn't know whether we weren't spies. If they thought about it, we were all Jews running away from the Germans, but they didn't give it any thought. Everybody was arrested. Thousands and thousands and thousands of them. It took about 3 days to round them all up. And they were taken to police stations, And my mother and I were allowed to go down to the police station. I can still see a tiny little courtyard where they were put in bunches at a time, and there was a wrought iron gate, and my father was sticking his hand through, and we brought him some shirts and some pants and some clothing for him to take along. And he told me that, you know, Polly, you're the man of the family, you take care of Mutti, I'll be back as soon as I can. That's what all the men were saying to the women who had come to say goodbye. And we managed to kiss through that ironwork, and, you know, luckily for us, we didn't know that that was the last kiss ever. You know, I don't know if we knew the future, how we'd handle it. I don't think we'd handle it very well. But we were very optimistic. I was sure I'd see my father again. I'm sure that he thought that he would see us again. And as we left there, my mother, who was despondent, decided to go into a Red Cross station to find out where these men were being sent. Well, they didn't know anything. But as it happens, here was a teacher who was volunteering her time. And it was André Exté. And something just clicked. She took pity on us. She decided that something needed to be done for this woman and her child, and she asked us to come to her house, which we did. Her husband was an architect. They had 2 small children of their own. German background, Flemish, Belgian. And she spoke excellent German. She was a German teacher of German. And she asked my mother whether she would consider working in that house, rearing those 2 young children, Anne-Marie and Jojo, Belgian short for Georges, whom I consider sister and brother today, as you would well imagine. My mother gratefully accepted. They lived about a block away from our little apartment. And then for about 2 years, that's, you know, mother would go there in the morning, spend the whole day working, and come back to the apartment at night. As I said, it was only about a block away. I went to school in 1941. Then the Germans said the Jews could no longer go to school, and I could not attend school. My teacher, Joseph Campé, who taught me French, and who I think of as a saint, retired when he was told he could not teach everyone. He was not of retirement age, but if he couldn't teach everybody, he wouldn't teach. What I didn't realize at the time was, of course, that by doing so, he was also putting his life on the line. Nothing happened to him. He would bring food to the house every day, sandwiches, wrapped up very neatly, so that I would have at least something to eat. You know, he did that every single day. And so far as we were concerned, he was a stranger. Nobody taken a liking to me, which got me quite a few beatings, because he would always say, you know, when we still had class, look at the petit Autrichien, the little Austrian, listen to his French, see how good it is. And he was very proud of this. What he didn't understand was that the other kids didn't like it, and they would wait for me after school, and I'd get a beating. I learned to fight. I gave back, maybe not as much as I got, but I gave plenty. Things became very tough in Brussels. I don't know how much you've studied this and how in Belgium, how aware you are of the situation. The Germans were trying to put the population to sleep. And so everything was very covert. Occasionally, some trucks would pull up and a house would be emptied of all of its inhabitants. I saw the house diagonally across where the entire family on my not on our side, the related side of the family, I'm not going to give you the details, about 15 people. I saw them being led into the truck. That building had 5 stories, it was emptied, and to my knowledge, not one human being returned, ever, from there. The building next to ours was emptied, the building straight across. This did not happen the same day, but once in a while, trucks would pull up, dogs, soldiers, they'd empty the building, and the people were gone. We were wearing the yellow star, of course. We had to have our little pekele, a little package ready by the door in case the knock came. We thought we were going to labor camps. So I had my little rucksack, my backpack. Quite different uses today, huh? But I can't help but remember those. Every time I see a young person with a backpack, I think of my backpack and have different uses. People occasionally were being shot. There was no food. Things were getting rougher and rougher. And one afternoon, there was a knock at the door, and there was a man, I think a young man, and he did not introduce himself, but he said, "You Schwartzbart," to my mother, and this must be Paul Schwartzbart. He spoke very good German, and he said to her, "Do you want to save your son's life? If you do, give him to me. I'll take him away and I'll save him." in retrospect, you know, that's an incredible question to ask anybody, let alone a mother. And she asked for a little time to think, and he said 2 hours. And so she went to the Steiner family and sat down, and they must have heard already that they did not share with us, because they said to my mother, let him go. And what's more, from this day forth, he will be called Paul Eckstein. He may have our name. If I had been caught, all those people would have been dead too. You realize that? We didn't at the time, of course. They must have known something. We went back to the apartment. The man came back. My mother said yes. I took my little package, my little backpack. We kissed goodbye, and holding me, we walked off into the night. And he took me to the Gare du Luxembourg, which meant that I was going the direction of Luxembourg. And he said, okay, didn't use the word okay, I never heard that until after the war. He said, okay, take good care of yourself, remember, you're not a Jew. And he shook my hand. I was 9 years old, but I was a man, you know, not necessarily in the biological sense. And he walked away, telling me, get off at the village of Jamoigne. And he walked away. I never saw him again. And in the morning, the train stopped in the village of Jamoigne, and I met another teacher named Paul Joris, who had been sent there to wait for me. Now, Belgium was in the war a very short time. During that time, some of its soldiers died, and some were sent to POW camps in Germany. Since Belgium is a kingdom, many of the officers belonged to the aristocracy. The aristocracy of Belgium to establish some homes away from the big cities for these orphans, the kids of these officers who had fallen, also for the kids of the officers who were POWs. The Comité pour la Défense des Juifs, the Jewish Defense Committee, made up of young people like yourselves, had heard of this, and they went to see people in the government like the Princess of Merode, and they said, would you accept the idea of sneaking a few Jewish kids among all these orphans and so forth? And these people said yes, which is incredible. You know? And so I ended up in the Luxembourg, in the province de Luxembourg, in a little village named Jamoigne, which I was told recently had about, all told, about 1,000 people throughout the countryside and so forth, you know, in the village itself at that time, which is large. And there was a small 19th century chateau, which had been changed into a children's home, about 125 boys. And here I was, you know, a Jewish kid with 124 non-Jewish kids, trying to act like a very good Christian. I mean, I became Catholic overnight. If you think about it, it's a lot easier for a Jew to become a Catholic than the other way around. Okay, guys? But that's the humor, to relieve the tension. But it's true. You know, I learned those prayers literally, you know, a moment. And the 125 boys had about 30 teachers taking care of them. Some of whom were fleeing from the Germans, others who wanted to take care of kids. Most of them didn't want to go to the labor camps and were out there helping kids, so it worked out. And it was run by a major in the Belgian army, a retired major, and his wife, childless, who had accepted this responsibility, and of course who knew about me, as I found out later. And subsequently, Sue became a very good friend, even though he was about 12 years my senior, also became a very good friend. There was something that clicked between us that didn't make all the bad things go away, that made them bearable. We were organized as Boy Scouts, which meant that everybody had responsibilities. We lived, not I'm a teacher now myself, I realized how intelligent these people were, organizing kids like that in small groups with responsibilities and discipline. And in the morning they gave us lessons. Everything was good except math. I never caught up with my math completely. And in the afternoon we'd do our Boy Scout activities out in the woods, building huts, climbing trees, physical activity. We didn't have much to eat, but we were in good health, both and physically. Catechism, mass every day. I became the best altar boy you've ever met. I really think I was, Silly one. Probably not the best, but a darn good one. Any Catholics in here? You know the Mass in Latin? In French? I'm two up on you. And confession, of course, and what did we have to confess? Went to confess. He knew about me. Because, he never hesitated giving me communion, though I've seen movies where the priest hesitates and gives the kid away. You know, not this man, he never hesitated. I got my communion like all the other kids every single day. Until I was finally baptized, and then it became legitimate. Madame Taquet, the wife of the man who ran the home, and Paul Joris became my godmother and my godfather. They wanted to be sure I was saved if something else happened. They meant very well. I am totally convinced of that. And so time went by. I didn't know what happened to my father. I didn't know what happened to my mother. I'm sparing you many of the details. The Germans came. I can tell you one funny story. It's funny today. It wasn't funny then. The Germans came one morning. They had surrounded the place, and it looked like the entire German army. I imagine it was maybe a squad of men, you know, machine guns and so forth. And they were going through the halls, and we were lying side by side in small army cots, one kid next to the other, on little straw cots. They were just sacks with straw in them. I was so scared. I wet my bed. You know, now the chateau had stone floors, you know, and it sounds like timpani if you. And these two German soldiers with the machine guns heard this from across the room, and they came right over and said, "Look," and he said, you know, in German, you know, "Feels bad. It's not funny," and they laughed. I think now maybe they were fathers, you know, they were thinking of their own kids. They thought it was terribly funny. As I always say, if they'd thrown back those covers, it would have been the end of fun. It would have been 125 kids and 30 monitors and so forth, and maybe most of the village, everybody dead, you know, because that's how it worked. It didn't happen. They took away one man, one of the teachers, who had gotten out of his bed and up on the roof, and the dogs got him down. We never did find out whether they were looking for him or whether they got him because he tried to get away. I think we're absolutely sure of, and so are you, they were not looking for kids. Because there we were. It was very easy to identify us. Huh? I say us because 4 years ago, I found out that I was not the only Jewish kid. 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I found out, are you ready? 83. Now that's what I mean about people helping, and that's why I am basically an optimist. They did have to sneak a few of us among these kids. We were over half, because my math much more than half. 2 times 83 would be 166, or only 125. Okay? 2/3. Whatever. But the reason it worked, contrary to Au revoir les enfants and movies like that, which I'm not here to talk about, but you just got my point. The only boy who knew that there was another Jewish kid were 3 of them who had brothers. We didn't even know that these kids were brothers until 4 years ago. We had a reunion. 44 of us showed up. It's fantastic. Can you imagine finding 43 brothers all of a sudden? I'm rambling, but you don't care. Last May I went to New York where we had the first international conference of hidden children. Because, you know, many of us, thank God, there are many survivors, but up to now, nobody talked about the kids. How about the children who survived, not in camps, but hidden as Christians or hidden in families? There's a young woman on the peninsula who was hidden with a Dutch family. I know her very well now. And her story is that her family brought her to the United States. When she turned 18, she wanted to become a U.S. citizen. They had to tell her they were not her parents. Okay? Because she was an infant turned over to them. She thinks of them as her parents, but she mourns her biological parents. She's also become a Jewess. You know, so there's so many ramifications in these stories that we could stay here forever and never finish. But you would never forgive me. Next month, my Belgian group, is going to the Yad Vashem where we are officially recognizing these teachers who saved our lives, and they're going to be added to the official rolls. And we're going to plant trees, and it's going fantastic. As of 2 days ago, when I received the last letter, we are now 61 who have been found out of the 83, still alive and well. Each of us with 1 child, 2 children, families. So as we were able to tell these wonderful teachers who saved us, look guys, you didn't save a person, you saved generations. Because here we are. You know, some of us brought our children, others just brought the pictures. The old priest who walked up to me and said, Paul, you know, actually he said, Bud. And that was wonderful. Madame Taquet was blind, but she said she could see all her boys with her hands. She could see us with her hands. We called them Maman Taquet, and we would never go to sleep at night until she had come by and kissed all 125 boys, which she did. You know, and when if she were detained for any reason, we'd stay awake and wait. Good reason. Because the discipline was rigorous. We were liberated in October of 1944 by Americans. I've never seen such tall men in my life. I've never seen them before. They were all tall. Like a bad movie, you know, they were shooting 45s into fields and getting mortar shells and cannon fire back. They won the battle, obviously. Hay rations are delicious, or whatever they called them then. And out of the wax that we scraped off the packages, we made candles. And then I got permission from my godmother to leave the home and try to find my family. And I hitchhiked back to Belgium, to Brussels, and I ran into my mother on the street. It was a fantastic moment. And then we started waiting for my father to return. My father's story, unfortunately, does not end that way, as you gathered from what I said earlier. He, after having been deported for being Austrian, was sent into the Pyrenees of France with so many others. The French Vichy government was very happy to get all these people, and in 1942, Pierre Laval became a big man in the eyes of the Germans by turning all these Jews over to them en masse. All they had to do was provide transportation. My father threw a letter through a crack or whatever in Lyon, some good Samaritan, probably a teacher, picked it up and got it to my mother. So we have, what he didn't know was his farewell, but turned out to be his farewell because he said he'd write again as soon as he could, but we never got any other letters. He was sent to many camps. 4 years ago, I went through the archives because one of the women I met at the reunion said to me, I didn't save you. I said, I know, because you're a girl and I can tell the difference. And the guy who saved me was a guy. Okay? The person who saved me was a guy. English is getting bad as my mouth is getting drier and I'm getting a little excited. And she said, go check in the archives and make sure that, you know, try to find out if you were saved by our group. And I went there and I found the notebooks of the underground, and I'm a historical figure. My name is in it. I was actually picked by the Jewish underground to be saved. And I had found my codes, and I'm all right. Really, thank you. I'm probably overstaying my welcome. But while I was there, looking at these incredible notebooks, the simplicity, you know, they had 4 notebooks, you had to have all 4 to find the kid. So if the Germans found one, it didn't do him any good. One had my real name and the code number, the second one, the code number with my false name, then where I was and so forth, but individually they were of no, quite amazing. While I was there, the young woman who was helping me said, would you like to see your father's file? I said, what do you mean by father's file? She said, I dug it up for you. It was my father's file. It was horrible. Every punishment, every camp, every incident was totally documented. Everything stamped with his tattoo number. The documentation is incredible. Anyway, he was part of the death march from Großrosen to Buchenwald in the winter of 1945. 5 years of hell that man survived through all these camps. They killed him at 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning, February 18th, 1945. That's what it says in the papers they so proudly kept. About a month and a half before the liberation of Buchenwald, liberated in April. That's where I got all the details. One of the fascinating things about that is that it changed me, I think, as a human being. not necessarily for the better, but you know, time had gone by. I'm a teacher. I deal with people. I do have certain amounts of goodness inside of me, I think. But when I walked through those archives, and I looked at, was in floor to ceiling, as far as the eye could see, the files of the 30,000 some odd Jews who were deported out of Belgium only, and each one about this thick. You know, my father was a very important man to me, not to the world. His file was this thick. You know, somebody kept those files. All those wonderful Germans who say they never knew it happened. Okay? Somebody had to keep these files beautifully hand-script, typewritten, each one with a tattoo number, date of birth, time of arrival at the camp, time of departure, time of death, 5:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I mean, for God's sake, you know. It changed something in me, and there was a non-Jewish man with me who is in the news business, and he's seen it all, Vietnam included, but he was weeping. And I asked him, I said, Ken, yours. I understand mine, why yours? And he said, because I've never seen the bureaucracy of death. And that's what that was, the bureaucracy of death. Okay? But that's not the note I want to end on. I just wanted to tell you about my father, because that's how my father remains memorialized. People knowing Friedrich Schwartzbart existed, in spite of the revisionists who claim that he didn't. And so I must have had an immaculate birth somewhere. It doesn't work that way. Biologically, it's not feasible. Okay? Test tube baby, I know. Next month, as I said, we're going to pay tribute to these wonderful people who put their lives on the line, who said, I matter, meaning they themselves, and I can do something. And that's really my message. We do matter. We can do something. We need to help one another. We are each other's keepers. I'll be forever grateful. I think, a better Jew for having been a good Catholic. You know, pretty close, right? One point, perhaps, before I finish, is that my godfather, my godmother, the priest, none of them, when they saw me again, none asked me, did you stay Catholic? They knew, which makes them even bigger people. You know, they were not trying to change my way of thinking. They were trying to save my life the best way they knew how. You know, you think he paid for it? Not really. Paul Joris had 6 children with a lady who was another teacher there, Fourmi. They had 6 children. They went to the Congo where he was a teacher. They came back. And 23 years ago, in 1969, when I met the lady of my life and the mother of my children, I was so excited. I called him up in Belgium to say, Paul, I'm engaged. I'm going to be married. You know, I owe this to you too, and so forth. And his voice broke, and his wife had just been killed in a train accident. You know, so I don't know about justice and repayment for good deeds, but that's not why we do it. And I thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Schwartzbart. Stories about teachers. 2 weekends ago, I attended my 35th junior high school reunion. The reason that I went was because I had been told that Frau Emmy Altmann was going to be there, who was my first German teacher. And I wanted to talk to her about her experiences as a Jew in Nazi Germany. And she told me about how she had gotten her teaching credential in Bavaria. And they let me do it because, from her perspective, they didn't have any law prohibiting it yet, and the Germans were so precise and so thorough that if there wasn't a law prohibiting it, then they had to let her go ahead and do it. Now, I think we know that that was not always the case under the Nazis, that they were often arbitrary about making up new laws when it suited their pleasure. Anyway, she knows how lucky she was, but just one little aspect of her story was that she even got to choose the school at which she was going to first be assigned to teach once she had gotten her credential. And she chose a school in Nuremberg because she had relatives there, an Orthodox Jewish school that was still doing its thing. This was in 1935, 1936, after the Nuremberg laws had been promulgated. And she said for the first 6 months that she taught there, one of her students was a young Orthodox Jew, funny-looking little kid named Heinz Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was Emmy Osmond's student. I don't know if that's a claim to fame or not. She said he was very Orthodox at the time, and he certainly has lost that, hasn't he? Well, what I wanted to talk to you about is how the Holocaust is remembered in Germany today. And I want to break my remarks down into the ideal way that it is remembered, the way we would like to see Germans remembering it, and in which some of them actually do, and then the more unpleasant reality with its warts and zits about how many Germans remember the Holocaust in ways we wish they would not. And then I want to make some remarks about previous speakers, and I want to say some things briefly about a topic that my students in my English 400 section have been urging me to do, namely to address the question of what can we do and what must we do to prevent recurrences of the Holocaust or recurrences of genocide. Okay, so how did Germans see the Holocaust? For the ideal part of this, let me start simply by reading some excerpts. I think I'll just read the very last part of a landmark speech that the president of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, whose name is Richard von Weizsäcker, and I bet you 90 didn't know that because you think the president of Germany is Helmut Kohl, but he's not. It's Richard von Weizsäcker, and it's a very important name, and I'm going to write it on the board. Very highly respected, perhaps the most highly respected politician in Germany today. On the 8th of May, 1985, the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II, he delivered a landmark address about the importance of history and a knowledge of history and the application of history in people who are concerned to be responsible members of a democratic society. Let me just read you the very last section of this. It was more than an hour long, and it's a thing of great beauty, and English translations of it are available from the German consulate in San Francisco if you're interested in reading the whole thing. This is section 9. In Germany, Weizsäcker said, a new generation has grown into political maturity. Our people are not responsible for what happened over 40 years ago, but they are responsible for the historical consequences. What we of the older generation owe our young people is not the fulfillment of dreams, but honesty. Our intent is to help them to seek historical truth soberly and objectively, taking refuge neither in utopian panaceas nor in moral arrogance. From our own history, we have learned what terrible deeds humankind is capable of. Therefore, we dare not assume that we have now become better humans. There is no such thing as moral perfection achieved once and for all, not for anyone, not for any country. We have learned as human beings. As human beings, we shall remain in jeopardy. But we have the strength to overcome again and again the dangers we face. Hitler's way was to stoke prejudice, enmity, and hatred. What we ask of our young people today is this: never let yourselves be driven to enmity and hatred of other human beings, of Russians or Americans, of Jews or Turks, of radicals or conservatives, of blacks or whites. Learn to live with each other, not against each other. Demand of us, too, your democratically elected representatives, that we take these precepts ever to heart, and that we set an example for others. Let us honor freedom. Let us work for peace. Let us respect the rule of law. Let us be true to our own ideals of justice. Let us face the truth as best we can. Now, in line with these noble sentiments expressed by Richard von Weizsäcker, Holocaust consciousness has been institutionalized in Germany to a far greater extent than genocide consciousness has been institutionalized in any other country in the world, as far as I'm aware. Scores of billions of marks have been spent on restitution to individual Jews and to the State of Israel. Schools, after many years' embarrassed silence, now regularly devote history lesson blocks, usually in the 11th grade, to the study of the Third Reich. Films panel discussions, museum exhibits, special events of all kinds, focusing on myriad aspects of the Holocaust, are staple parts of the cultural diet in every large German city, and most of the smaller ones as well. Now, not for a moment do I wish to imply that this current government-sponsored high visibility of Holocaust issues washes away German guilt. It could never do that. But it certainly promotes a greater sense of healthy responsibility among the German populace than the treatment, for example, that the U.S. government has accorded to Japanese Americans interned and dispossessed during World War II. Surely one can never do enough to atone for mass-scale atrocities. But however inadequate German atonement must ultimately remain, it does indeed amount to more than mere lip service. And how much more than that, I leave to your judgment. Okay, so that's the ideal side of things. Germany, through its governmental institutions, is trying to do certain things in order to raise Holocaust consciousness and make appropriate restitution and all the kinds of things that we would like them to do. What about the current reality of the man and woman on the street? For these remarks, I have used the poll that was published in January of this year, which was taken in order to assess attitudes of Germans and Jews towards each other. It was undertaken by the Emnit Institute in Bielefeld and the Gallup Institute in Tel Aviv. And they polled 2,000 Western Germans and 1,000 Eastern Germans out of a total populace of about 60 million adult Germans. And they polled 1,000 Israeli Jews, representing about 4.1 million adult Jewish Israelis. Just by way of some of the various responses that I found enlightening and often distressing. First, 14% of the Germans polled agreed with the hypothetical assertion, quote, "The Jews themselves are partly responsible for the hatred and persecution they suffer," end quote. Second, 36% of the Germans polled agreed with the assertion, quote, "Jews have too much influence in the world," end quote. Third, 20% of the Germans polled believe that Germans are superior to other nationalities. Four, based on their analysis of responses to 16 such questions, the pollsters estimate that 13% of all Germans harbor predominantly anti-Semitic attitudes. And interestingly, very interestingly, the figure was far higher in Western Germany than in Eastern Germany. 16% of Western Germans and only 4% of Eastern Germans. 5, 73% of Germans polled believe that, quote, "most reports about concentration camp practices are true." But 15% believe, quote, "many of the reports are exaggerated." Sixth, I find it saddening in view of President von Weizsäcker's highly praised speech of 1985 that I read you the last part of, that only 33% of the German respondents answered affirmatively or agreed with the statement, quote, "The German people bear a special responsibility towards the Jews, even if today's Germans cannot be held guilty for persecution of Jews during the Nazi period." 33% agreed with that statement and 42% disagreed with it. 24% voiced no opinion on the responsibility of Germans towards Jews. Fully 62% of the Germans polled agreed with this statement, quote, "46 years after the end of the war, it's time to stop talking so much about persecution of the Jews and lay the past to rest." 20% disagreed with that statement, 16% had no opinion. And finally, as an entree to the next section of my talk, the pollsters discovered a very strong correlation, which shouldn't surprise any of us, but here it is, correlation between anti-Semitic and generally xenophobic, that is, anti-foreigner attitudes on the parts of the respondents. Foreigners, anti-foreigners, anti-foreign movements, skinheads, anti-skinhead movements. This is what has Germans thrall right now. The immigration and asylum issue I would call a 1992 case in point of Holocaust consciousness. The catchword is the name of a town in East Germany, Hoyerswerda. It's a coal mining town, where late last year skinheads trashed a foreigners' hostel that was housing about 280 applicants for political asylum, forcing the local government to shut down the hostel and to relocate the foreigners. The skinheads were cheered on by many respectable local residents, and they met no significant opposition by the police. Now, the German newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, etc. have since carried thousands of articles and commentaries on the Hoyerswerda riot and its implications. And anti-skinhead demonstrations, often including violent tactics against the skinheads themselves, have become more numerous than the skinhead attacks. Liberal and conservative-minded Germans, including all the major political parties, have fallen all over themselves in appealing to the populace to practice tolerance of racial and ethnic minorities. Meanwhile, though, debate rages at all levels of government on whether and how the immigration laws should be tightened up. Thus, while Germans may insist that the Holocaust per se should be laid to rest, they are debating massively and loudly issues of racism, exclusionism, nationalism, and economic and social policy that, as we in this course well, constituent parts of Holocaust consciousness. A little factual background to that debate. 1991 saw an immense increase in the number of asylum seekers in Germany, just over 256,000 compared to 193,000 the previous year. The German Constitution, thanks to the post-Third Reich sensitivity of the founders of the Federal Republic, sensitivity to questions of political persecution and the need for asylum, the German Constitution grants the most generous asylum rights to oppressed people of any country in the world. The question is it too generous? The Germans aren't sure. Per capita, more than 5 times as many immigrants, that is per capita of the existing population, more than 5 times as many immigrants and asylum seekers are now entering Germany, which characterizes itself as a non-immigrant country, as are entering the United States, which, as we all know, was built on the numbers and strengths and contributions of immigrants. Let's see. I think I will skip a quote from an article. I'll just bring this to your attention in not the most recent, but the next to most recent issue of the New York Review of Books. There's an article by Ian Buruma called Outsiders, which is about the skinhead phenomenon in Germany, and I recommend this to your attention. It paints in far greater detail the total picture, far greater detail than I'm able to offer you here. I want to skip that. And go to a need that I feel to comment briefly on a couple of previous presentations in this series. First, one of the things that John Roth said that disquieted me somewhat was that we need to ask, I'm more or less quoting him, we need to ask the small questions because big questions too often engender small answers. Now, he was using that as the justification for looking at case studies, like Mr. Schwartzbart's case study, which I think are wonderful and necessary, and of course they're the stuff, the raw material of which the whole Holocaust issue is made, and of course we have to pay attention to them. But I don't think that by paying attention to them, we should feel ourselves absolved of the need to ask big questions, even if we can't come up with satisfying big answers, because I think that we should be grateful, happy for any small answers we come up with, which are accurate, digestible, and productive. It seems to me that small answers are better than none at all. And as John Steiner put it, we better come up with some answers soon to the kinds of problems that are all this Holocaust consciousness, because if we don't, the fate of the world will be much worse than if we do. Now, it seems to me that the biggest of these big questions that we need to answer, given the focus of this course, is the one that my students have been impatiently insisting upon, namely, how do we prevent genocide? And we would do well, once again, to recall what President von Weizsäcker said about the things that we should do. I won't reread it. But Professor Jager, as well, in his talk a couple of weeks ago, gave us some useful impulses that I would briefly like to elaborate on. He emphasized the need to accept the summons of the other, the challenge, the summons that the other, or the different person presents to us, different races present to us. The need to build bridges so as to accommodate people different from ourselves within our own horizons. And he emphasized that that is the very of our culture. What are some implications of bridge building? It seems to me that one effect of completed bridges is that they make the people on the other side, whom we have reached, feel more valuable than if we'd ignored them. I must briefly go back to one of the things that I skipped over, namely a story that I read in Der Spiegel about the skinheads themselves, what kind of people they are, and what the threats are that they feel. Almost exclusively, the skinheads are made up of socioeconomically disadvantaged, uneducated young men. They, more than any other segment of German society, are indeed in competition. That is to say, they have reason to feel threatened by the influx of foreigners. They're in competition with them for the jobs, the unskilled jobs that are the only ones that the young Germans are qualified to take. They're in competition with them for low rents in housing projects that are built for people with not much money. And get this, they're in competition sexually with these foreigners as well. How does that work? Most of the foreigners, the largest proportion are Turks. Many of the non-Turks are Muslims. The Turks particularly, but Muslims in general, tend to cloister their young females. They keep them at home. They don't let them go swimming, let alone to a disco. And so you have these hundreds of thousands of young foreign men who come in who have been barred access to their young foreign women. And naturally, they compete then with the young German men for the available females, and you can see that what we're dealing with here is a basically imperative kind of situation. These poor young guys feel threatened by the very existence there in their towns of these foreigners, but nobody will listen to them. Nobody wants to deal with the skinheads. They are the dregs, they are the outcasts. Social services pay very little attention to them, and they don't get heard, and what surprise does it come to us as that they then reach to violence. So, back to the bridges. One effect of completed bridges is to make people on the other side whom we have reached feel more valuable than if we'd ignored them. I extrapolate from that. We need to develop a social system that grants everyone access to self-esteem. The Germans haven't managed it, and the skinheads are proof of that. We Americans do even worse. Wonderful Udo Lindenberg song about the skinheads has this line in it. Armes Kind, dummes Kind, jetzt stolperst du mit im braunen Wind. Poor child, stupid kid, now you're stumbling along in the brown wind, and the brown is a reference to Nazi brown shirts. John Vasconcellos, for all the lambasting that he's taken at the hands of the popular press and Doonesbury and so forth, appears to me to be an astute prophet of necessary social change. If we don't provide young people with self-esteem, they will be violent. Let me put that on a smaller scale. We need to listen to each other, most especially to the people who are different from us. Rabbi Michael Robinson, speaking last year in the War and Peace Lecture Series, put it this way: we must share each other's pain. Goes back to Parsifal, if you want a nice example from Germany. Parsifal finally gets up the gumption and has the wit to ask the King of the Grail, Was wird dir, oh, what is wrong with you? Up to that point, he had never bothered to ask what the problem was of this suffering man. Well, this compassion, sharing pain, call it a feminist trait if you like, whatever. Obviously, we have got to practice it more if we really care to nip potential holocausts in the bud. Now, just listening to people, sharing their pain, hearing how they're hurting, precondition to real bridge building, but from my perspective, it's not enough. Bridges imply more than just a theoretical or a psychological connectedness. They also imply an exchange of goods, things, material possessions. And I wonder how many liberal-minded Euro-Americans would be willing to engage in some sort of modest redistribution of wealth as a means of combating racism and the brutality to which it often leads. I'm getting into some difficult questions that I don't really know the answer to. I mean, I know how I have to act. I'm not setting that up as some kind of paradigm that I think you all should follow. I just think that we need to think about these questions and come up with some answer that's meaningful to ourselves. How much material sharing should we be willing to commit ourselves to if we're serious about preventing holocausts? Let me fit in here what I see as a problematical aspect of Jewish religious practice, namely the doctrine of the chosen people. I ask, as the German Jewish professor of philosophy Ernst Tugendhat does, he's the person that I got the idea from, how I belief in the chosen people doctrine can be made consonant with bridge building. How much sharing are we willing to do, and can we do, and still maintain a proud, separate identity? Sharing diversity without diminishing it. Sharing diversity while celebrating it. Seems to me that that is the key. It's not an answer, but it's a challenge.
will be very brief and share with you some of the experiences I've had in the course of my research with German people and Austrian people while in Europe virtually every year since 56, 58 actually. And so I'll just simply sum up and let you some of my concerns and some of the situation changed. Now, let me just start with one, what you might call so-called Auschwitz joke. And a friend of mine just told it to me several years ago and anticipated that I would be finding it very humorous, which I didn't. But he did, and he almost laughed his head off after he told me the joke. Now, the joke was just about like that. How many Jews fit into a VW bus? And so the answer is, well, I don't know, just about 4 or 5 maybe. And said, no, just about 50, and they all fit into their VW bus ashtray. These are these types of jokes which you keep on hearing from people who are educated, intelligent, and find them funny for reasons which may, but they do exist and they circulate. Now the interesting part is that today in Germany you have just about 40,000 Jews living there in entire Germany, so they no longer are really a viable minority. They don't come to the notice of any fellow German citizens. But yet, whenever they find out that they happen to be in some sort of conspicuous professional position, these are that people will respond to them and view them as Jews. Now, the one thing which has shifted to some extent, that they are viewed not as racial Jews to that extent anymore, but among certain groups they still view them as racial Jews and not religious Jews. Now that is changing. And it's changing simply because of what we earlier, that is to say very specifically Phil Beard has discussed, namely that the Jews no longer are viewed as a realistic threat by the Germans, but other foreigners who happen to be Turks. And they are the ones who are now in limelight. And so from the type of typical anti-Semitism which prevailed until the end of World War II, we have now what you might call a xenophobia, the fear or dislike of foreigners, which prevails. And the Jews being a very minute minority, which really doesn't come to the attention or the notice of Germans, no longer really are a concrete target, but they still are in the minds of the Germans because of the past, and therefore the type of anti-Semitism, which is ideational, still prevails to this day, and even in a more grosser form in Austria. And in Austria, the Jews are still being discussed without being present. And that is the interesting phenomenon, that they still are a problem in the minds of people who still bear this type of anti-Semitism with which they have been socialized without really having a target, because the target is virtually non-existent. Now, let me just switch to the very specific research and see how former members of the SS, many of whom were perpetrators, who are still alive, and these are usually the younger ones, people who were born around 1920, 1916, 17, 18, because the older ones, of course, have died by virtue of old age. So discussing with them anti-Semitism and the past is still a very interesting thing, because they will discuss with you virtually anything which happened to them and what they experienced during the Third Reich with some sort of a glee and reminiscent, nostalgic notions, because they are interested in the past because there they played a very different role than they are playing today. Today they are just in business or in some other occupations which relate to commercial activities more than anything else, agents, salespeople, or they represent some corporation and are in import and export very frequently. So their position today is very different than it used to be, namely they've lost power, they've lost influence, and they've lost the uniform, which gave them status, and that is something which they miss very badly. Now, talking about their feelings towards Jews is a very interesting sort of thing. First of all, they try to accept the Jews and view them in a different light in view of the fact that the Israelis, and particularly the military power, has changed the picture of the Jew, which was usually stereotyped as a coward, anti-sports, sedate, and not at all physically attractive. And I'm being now very underscore some of the things which were stressed about the physical appearance. In other words, Jews were depicted instead as repulsive and everything else but appealing. Now that has changed by virtue of the fact that the state of Israel has been successful as much as they could defend themselves with some degree of heroism against a majority of Arab countries and prevailed in the process. And that is something which they admire because they still admire power. They admire success, military success. And that has made a very great impression on them. However, they still have a problem with viewing the Jews as a race. And that is, of course, the tremendous myth which was spread during the early development of National Socialism. And they described the Jews as people who were racially inferior, and also defining them as a race which was different from the so-called Aryan race. Now, that is something which no longer can be upheld, but some of them still adhere to that because regardless of the persuasion, as for example Mr. Schwartzbart said, if he would have stayed, let's say, assume that he would have stayed a Catholic, because as he told us, he was Baptist and was for a while a practicing Catholic. Now that would not be recognized by the former members of the SS because the religious faith was not a determinant which made you a Jew, but your racial background. And that is a very interesting sort of thing because it's all nonsense. It simply cannot be scientifically upheld because there is no such a thing as a Jewish race. So they still revert to that because if you would tell them that that you are not a Jew but a Christian, and say, well, but you know, according to Nuremberg laws, and they wouldn't say directly Nuremberg laws, but they said according to our definition, you are a Jew and will stay a Jew until you die. And anyone who will relate to you and marry you and all that will be polluted by your blood, Jewish blood, Christian blood. And all these sort of things are just things which we accept mindlessly, but do not exist because they scientifically are just exactly what they are, namely a myth. So let me just give you very quickly some few examples of my experiences. When I went, for example, to a lake resort with my son, who is very blonde and not at all Jewish looking, for reasons which we won't go into, we were in a pension, in a nice little small hotel with lots of interesting people who came from all different walks of life. And the very moment we appeared there, and of course we went there in order to swim and enjoy the lake. It was a lake resort. I was there in swimming trunks, and even here I go around and they of course see my tattoo. And people respond to that tattoo, and some of them know what it is, and some people guess what it is, depending on their background. The older ones, of course, have a very good idea in terms of what it stands for. The younger ones don't, because one day I was walking around and just about to go swimming, and one person, young person, came to me and said, "I know who you are. I know what you were doing. During the war you were in the SS, because my uncle was also in the SS and he also has a tattoo." Well, what he was referring to, the tattoo, was the blood group which was tattooed under their armpit. And that way, whenever they got injured or shot in battle, they were immediately able to give them the blood transfusions, because they knew what sort of blood group they've had. So he confused any tattoo which was on an arm with that tattoo of an SS man, and said, "Well, so you were one of them, because I fit the age. I could have been, age-wise in the SS. Of course, I was on the other side of the picture." But so that was one. The young people really are very confused about. The older ones respond very differently. And going back to the lake resort, they just simply kept my son and myself out of any of social activity. They just simply ignored us. We are not invited to any of social activities within that small hotel, and were socially isolated. And that was the consequence. They did not really discriminate against us, other than simply keeping us out, away from any sort of social gathering. Now, the other story goes as follows. When I interview some of the former members of the SS, I'm very frequently invited to their homes. And in their homes, then of course I'm very careful, depending on the situation, to have a long sleeve shirt on or a short sleeve, depending on that. The very moment they know that I had some sort of concentration camp experience, their story, their response will be very different than if they don't know it. If they just, for example, assume that I'm just an American, or coming from America and all that, and I just happen to speak German without too much of an accent and what have you. So their stories will be changed accordingly, depending to what extent they know that I've been in concentration camps, or to what extent they think I'm just a plain average American scholar who is doing research. So situation changes very frequently. People who still very much influenced by what happened during the Third Reich, while, because they're still influenced by the way they were socialized, and that it's something which lingers on. And during certain situations in life will crop up again, and they will respond to that, because that is very deeply embedded, this sort of prejudice, these sort of National Socialist notion, ideology are still very deeply embedded in them. Now, another story which is very typical in terms of xenophobia, and as well as the tattoo, which of course during the summer is because I don't wear any jacket during that time when it is really hot. I took a taxi to a certain place back in Bonn, which is the capital of Germany, as you know, and it was just about 2 years ago. And so I discussed the fare, what I had to pay with the taxi cab driver, and he just told me how much but if I could have a receipt. Now, there are several different words which you can use in German to ask for a receipt, and I used a word which is Bestätigung rather than Quittung. And if you use Bestätigung, it's not the most correct description of what I wanted. And he just went wild and started to yell at me and make fun and all that, simply because I used a different word which somehow made it very clear I was not a German. And because I used his services, which was from the station not too far to where I stayed. He felt that he was not getting enough of a fare, and that, of course, triggered even a greater wrath. So he just simply assailed me verbally to the point that he just called me names and all these sort of things. I've used the wrong word for receipt in German. So these are just few examples which I wanted to mention to you, which still prevail, and depending on the group of people, the segment of the people, either in Austria or in Germany, and particularly Austria, where anti-Semitism I consider to be much more virulent than it is in Germany at the moment, where they still talk, as I said before, about the Jews in a very destructive, negative sense without really having enough to really pose a threat. It still lingers on, and when there will be a crisis, as it is now economically in Germany and all that, all these things will come and surface again. And that is precisely something which I can see coming, except the Jews no longer are a target, a viable target, as I said earlier, but they are just part of those foreigners whom they don't want to have in their midst. If there are any questions, we'll answer them if we have any time left. Thank you.
My name is Bernard Offen. I think I'd rather just very briefly tell you my story, and then I want to read something. I was born in Krakow, Poland, and came from a family of 6 people. We got trapped in the Krakow ghetto. My family started disappearing. Part of it within months after the Germans invaded, and grandmother. Then my brothers disappeared. We were through forced labor. We had to many times work strange places. The only way actually we could get bread, food, was to work for work. By that time, of course, we had to wear armbands. The war started when I was 11. I think I'm about 6 years older than, I'm 62, almost 63. I have, I want to also say right now that I have two other brothers who survived, older brothers. I'm the youngest. I had a sister too. Then my mother and sister disappeared on a roundup and a transport out of the Krakow ghetto. Then my father and I, we worked several different places, worked as shoemakers also. The first camp was the Plaszow camp to the city of Krakow. And there we worked as shoemakers. There's several different. I was taken out of that camp and I escaped. I tried to hide with Polish people, but could not find people who would hide me any longer than one day. Last year I went back and I wanted to look up these people who had sheltered me for one day. And I found their offsprings, and that was on the last days that I was in Krakow. I spent a whole summer there. And this year when I return, I will be more in touch with them because it is very important to appreciate the people who help in any ways, because it was difficult. And in Poland, it was very, very dangerous. They would have been, if they would have been caught with me, they would have all been shot. So you got to keep that in mind. Anyways, I escaped from this camp, and I was hidden by these people, and I ended up in another concentration camp because there was no place for me to go. Most of the Polish population was either afraid or hostile. And because their long history of anti-Semitism underlying all of that. So I got into another concentration camp. A small one was called Ulag. The first one was Plaszow. The second one was Ulag. And then I worked and all kinds. That camp was closed down and was liquidated, and I was sent back to the other camp and, in fact, reunited with my father. At that point in time, I did not know what happened to the rest of my family. And I heard through grapevine that my brothers were in some camp called Bieliczka. So, but I had no knowledge about that. Then that camp was being closed down. I worked as a shoemaker in that particular camp with my father, building boots for the German army. There's a story about that, how we sabotaged boots. So very unique. People were shot for it, but I'll tell you the story later, perhaps. That camp, the Plaszow camp, was being liquidated, and we were put aboard a train, a cattle train. So we ended up in Mauthausen in Austria. What I did not know and don't remember till this day is that I remember my father and him protecting me in the crush of people in the cattle car. I remember that very well. But my brothers a few years ago said to me, "Bernard, we were in cattle car with you." I have no memory of that event, of seeing them. So that's an interesting. And to this day, we have not talked about the details of that. My brothers have been avoiding that, the real details. They have been telling their stories since I've been doing it for quite a while. But details we sometimes have difficulty in talking about. From Auschwitz, my brothers were, from Mauthausen, my brothers were sent to a camp called Gusen, which was a stone quarry. Some of you might have seen the quarry and the steps that they had leading out, in which the people perished in building that. That's where they survived. And that's really unique for two brothers to survive together from that camp. In the meantime, my father and I were sent from Mauthausen to Auschwitz. Another long journey. In Auschwitz, he went one way, I went the other way. He ended up in the gas chamber. I'm here to tell you a story. If you have this flyer, it says the work. Do you have this flyer? Do you want to look at it again at the birds? When I was in Auschwitz, I was remembering the dreams I had many times. I dreamt that I was a bird and I could fly out of there. When I told this story of mine, she created this art of these birds jumping off the wire. No, thank you. After Auschwitz, I was sent to an area near Munich. I'm not quite sure what the distance is, but it was in the Landsberg area. And I was in a labor camp. At various jobs again. I'm an optimist, and like Paul, I also want to look at the positive part that people played in rescuing people and focus in on that. So at the end of May, I'm going back to Poland again. I'm going to be working on another film production, this time about my father. It is included, the information is included on this brochure, so anyone wants one can have one. Also, that I'm going to be going to be leading walks in Poland from the Krakow ghetto to the Pasha camp, and then later on going to walk to Auschwitz. It's going to be a 2-day walk, or we're going to bus to it. All of that is as a process of healing and self-confrontation, and to look at the past simply. So all this information is on here. Anyone that wishes to connect with me in Poland. I was liberated American Army, May 7, 1945. We were on a march from this camp. Where to, I don't know. All I know is that after liberation, and it happened kind of quickly, that the guards abandoned us in this these army barracks, a place called Wolfratshausen. I'm just pronouncing it the way I heard it, you know. And I became a mascot for a tank unit. And to this day, I remember the people who, the 2 soldiers that came with me after I went looking for them, who came back to the camp because there was a blow and they couldn't get to it. So I remember many details. I won't get into the horror unless you have specific questions you might want to ask of me. After liberation, I started looking for my brothers. I was living in Munich by that time, and I found this book which listed survivors in this book, and I remember looking it up under the letter O. My name is Offen, and I found out my brothers were alive. So it was the next day that I hopped a coal train, because trains were not running regularly at that point yet, to Austria, to Salzburg, where the book said my brothers were. So after some train ride and on top of that coal, I got to Salzburg, and they said, yes, your brothers were here. However, they're not here. And they went to Italy. So I had to wait for a visa. And it was about 6 weeks. I was repatriated with Italian people who were being sent back to Italy. They were prisoners of war or laborers or whatever. And I went to this town called Bari. So I had an address to go to, so I go to the address, and they says, yes, your brothers were here, but they're no longer here. So I said, where are they? Well, they're in this Polish army camp. So I hitched rides with Polish army trucks, and I get to the camp where my brothers are, and they say, yes, your brothers were here, but they're no longer here. They've been transferred. So they send me, they tell me to go to this other camp, and when I get there, he says, yes, oh yes, your brothers are here. However, they're not here because they are on leave. So I remember going into the town to the canteen and finding my brothers healthy and restored and in uniform. And they look like heroes to me. To this day, that is etched up for me also, you know, like little sticklach, little pieces. From there, we remained in Italy about 1 year. Then we were sent to England as part of the demobilization process of the Polish army being under the control of the British. And I ended up in England. I was there 5 years, and I came to this country. Within after I came to this country, I was drafted in the army and ended up in Korea. On my citizenship papers, it says naturalized in Korea. So I don't know if that makes me also a Korean citizen besides a U.S. citizen. I came to this country and army, came out, 17 years, 2 grown sons, divorced, started traveling for many years and teaching and learning and going to school. I was a student here for 3 years, and I've had many wonderful teachers. And I know how important that is, teachers. Who you give your mind to, who you give access to your mind is critical. It's like a critical evolution for human beings and how we live in society, whether we create concentration camps, mass murder factories, or whether we start to fulfill the Constitution that is so generous and beautiful in its essence. So, let me just read a little. I'll leave some questions, some time for questions. Got how much time? Got to switch glasses to see how much time by God to wind up. So none. None. 0. I need to do that. I call this piece the economic chains of slavery. The economic chains of slavery, and who is it we are bound to? What do I or we do and sell out, and at what price? What kings and queens, nations, state, dictator, or company, or in fact a relationship, what is it that we and I do in our relationship? How do we behave to another one? Do we punch each other out physically, emotionally, or do we really welcome another human being into our relationship as a holy being to be treated as such and expecting that treatment for ourselves? So what are the workings that, what kind of job do we have? And when we leave this school, what are we going to be contributing? And what are we training here for? How are we going to make a livelihood? And what of all? What systems are we going to contribute to create and recreate? Who are the bosses? Who power? And how do we empower them with our life's blood and energy? What are we working for, and how do we get in touch with our own rigidness? And when am I, and when are you grounded with all the things that are going on in our lives, especially you as students? How do we examine our path and be conscious about how we as individuals help to create the reality? What industry are we getting trained for? In the industry, of course, we have their own agenda to protect their own turf. And how and what they will do to make a profit. How do we create and recreate economic conditions for good or bad, feast or famine, war or peace, stagnation or growth, awakening or darkness? Like Bruce Cockburn's songs about the Holocaust, he calls us all survivors. And we are in this society that we live in many ways. But we are witnesses. As a Jew, I have a point of reference. It leads me to question and examine as to what am I learning. I believe that some of the anti-Semitism comes to be because the subject of chosenness. I believe that there is no such a thing as chosenness. I think we keep choosing God is what it is, because of the history that we as Jews had, that there are some many good ways of just living a life. And that is what we are being persecuted for, because people don't want to be reminded what it says about things could be better than they really are. That we need to empower ourselves. That we need to re-examine who are we loaning our ears to. You know, the way we are learning, what are the things to do? Where wasn't responsible for the system that comes into being? Where are you cause in continuing the things that are going on in the world? And how come we have homeless people? How come we have so many dysfunctional families and people? When do I, as an individual, become the potential Nazi, the skinhead? Or the great teacher to develop the individual's creativity to find better ways of doing things instead of just training survival. Are you training just for survival? In ways of examining the future, in the ways of speaking, of thinking of better ways of creating and recreating our liberty and the right to speak and to discover the Torah. And I don't mean the Jewish Torah. I mean, if you're a Christian, then examine that. And if you're something else, examine that. But without examination, rather than blind, total accept everything that has preceded us, will lead us back to the nuclear gas chamber.